Well, hello everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. I appreciate everybody joining us here for another installment of our webinar. We have a pretty good group here today. We've got our CT Strategies crew in the form of Al Gina, Sean Beddoes, Brad Skinner, and thank you to Hallie, represented as the CT Strategies account, you see. Also, very pleased to have with us Marcelo Castaño from Kimax and Arnal Wink from KLM. The purpose, as you all know, for signing up to this webinar is to kind of take you through as best we can what the collective group here heard at the CBP Trade and Cargo Security Summit a couple of weeks ago, or yeah, a couple of weeks ago now, down in New Orleans. For those of you that do attend every now and then, you know that it's one of the biggest events, if not the biggest event of the year that they have when it comes to trade, and a real opportunity to hear kind of what's on the mind of the senior officials and the opportunity for them to communicate what the priorities are for the coming year. I think there's enough potential jokes to be made of the importance of that this year. Anybody who watches the news or lives in the supply chain, as you all do, probably concerned, as we all are, for divining some sort of predictability from the agency to understand what is and is not going to happen. So we've assembled the panel here today to kind of walk you through what CBP really talked about, and then also bring it down practically for some strategies that you can use in your businesses. Also, as many of you know, we do a lot of these webinars on the CTPAT program and specifically applying it to that as well. Just as a starting point or kind of a frame for the agenda today, we're gonna start off with a higher level strategic viewpoint, and then we're gonna kind of whittle our way down to some strategies, and then again down to the specific CTPAT application of what we heard. As you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. We'll do our level best to answer as many as we can. Hopefully, with the presentation that we have, many of your questions will be answers through the presentation. So without further ado, we have a lot of speakers. We have a lot of ground to cover. Let's just start it off, and I'm going to pass over the mic or the stage, as you will, to Algina. Really to kind of frame that strategic vision, what we heard, particularly when it comes to the policies of the new administration. I don't think there was a shortage of the phrase America First. We heard that probably in every panel discussion we heard, and I think it'd be nice to know kind of what that means practically, and what is going on potentially inside the agency as they try to accommodate the new administration's priorities. So Al, that's a pretty general setup for you and dangerous for me, but I'll do my best to keep you on time. But over to you to start things off.
No, well, thank you, Andrew, and welcome to all that have called in. I guess I can give you my perspective from when I was at Customs and then this Customs Service, then CBP for over 30 years. I had the true fortunate blessing and gratitude to finish off my career as the Assistant Commissioner for Trade. So I give you that so that I'm not going to tell you whether I agree or disagree with the strategy. I'm just going to tell you what I observed. And I think that was the question Andrew asked. What did I take away from this symposium? I've been to every one since I left the agency, and I was sitting on the dais as the Assistant Commissioner for Trade for many years when I was in the agency. And I think the level of collaboration that we experienced in the past, and again, I'm not going to tell you if I agree or disagree, but as Andrew indicated, the Customs and Border Protection agency is part of the executive branch. That's who is setting the direction for the country and the government. It's part of DHS, who also then provides some guidance to CBP. Generally, in the past, you have 1,000 people attending this event that are coming with their 30 plus years of extensive experience, and they're looking for a collaborative discussion and dialogue. And I believe many of us and many of my former colleagues received that dialogue in a very positive way, because what we always had strived to do, and I believe the agency, those career CBP people still want to do, is do not ever implement a policy that will cause harm to the importing and exporting community. Clearly, when I sat down at that event, a top priority of the agency, green trade strategy, no longer exists. So it's basically you shifted from an administration to a new administration, and because of their priorities, there are things that are just not even discussed at the agenda or put on the agenda, such as the perfect example I can give you. Previously, John Leonard, as the Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner for Trade, it was a priority for them. We need to create a green strategy. This current administration thinks differently. So like I said, I'm not telling you whether I agree or disagree. That's off the agenda. As Andrew alluded to, there was a lot of emphasis about America First policy. So what that means is, and the examples that I could give you is in de minimis and forced labor. De minimis, there was an extensive discussion about, doing away with it relative to China. They alluded to 6 years ago having 160 million shipments. This past year, I think it's like 1.5 billion shipments, 4 million shipments per day. In the past, there would probably be a much more vigorous discussion and dialogue on like, okay, well, how do we address this? Clearly, America First policy, we're doing away with it. That's it. We're doing away with it. And, the people who maybe, my opinion, abusing the system, stopping their shipments north of the border or south of the border, breaking it down into smaller shipments. I guess the current administration that's a lot of duty, taxes, and revenue that are not being paid where they were being paid previously. America First. The emphasis is on that first. America First, we're going to do away with it. Forced labor, kind of similar. Just as a quick aside, there was something that used to be in the government called, consumptive demand. And that meant, I was embarrassed by this when I learned it, that the US would allow things into the US if it met a certain demand that was needed, and would willfully, my words, willfully turn a blind eye to whether or not that was manufactured, produced by indentured labor, forced labor. And then it was in the Trade Facilitation, Trade Enforcement Act that changed. And then I give credit to Senator Wyden, very strongly emphasized putting in something relative to forced labor. And I sat through the forced labor breakout session. There was no ambiguity. It was basically, this is the way it is, and you need to provide us the information to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that everything in that shipment was not manufactured or sourced from a certain area within China, the Uyghur China. Now, the reason I emphasize that is I always was raised within the agency under informed compliance. That was, we at CBP, at Legacy Customs, we inform you, and you in turn can comply. And if we're making unrealistic expectations of you. We would discuss that. What's your business model? How could we get the best information? And we always seem to find a middle ground. I think America First policy is this is the requirements. You need to provide us that information. If you can't, it's not coming in the country. That's it. And when I sat in the forced labor session, I think the person on the dais from the agency basically said, there is no middle ground. I think they used an example of a automobile tire. If that tire like has 100 different chemicals or processes that went into that tire, you need to identify where every part of that is sourced, or it's not coming into the country. There is no alternative discussion, dialogue. It's again, America First policy. So I'll just give one quick example uh, on the tariff engineering. There's legitimate tariff engineering, and then there's what we would refer to as illicit tariff engineering, or someone who's just trying to circumvent the appropriate duties of taxes, revenue, or tariffs, whatever you want to call them. And I think what was happening with the de minimis was allowing illicit activity to happen in that environment. And usually we would discuss and collaborate on how to remove it. And in this case, it was just America first. It's causing harm, and therefore there is no further discussion. I'll stop with this. I knew what the next two and a half days were going to be when I think it was the first CBP spokesperson said, "We're not here to discuss policy." And I was like, I was sitting at a table, and you love to sit at a table when nobody else knows who you are or what your background was. And I'm going to clean it up because there was some expletives and curse words in it. It was like, well, then why are we here? Like, why did you, CBP, invite us to come to this party if you don't want to discuss the most relevant things, and that's these new policies? So I'll pause there.
Thanks, Al. Thanks for that ray of sunshine. Hopefully, we can turn it a little better. To some of the questions coming in. Um, Apologies if this is coming in low to the panelists. I think you guys are hearing us okay. So if there is something on our end, we'll try to remedy that. Apologize there, but we'll see what we can do. There is one specific question before I turn, Brad. I'm going to come to you in a second. The question on the external revenue service that was floated, I think, on day one in one of the executive orders. And I'll stand corrected by my colleagues here that were at the event. That was not brought up at all. So there's two parts to this answer, and hopefully it's not it doesn't come across as complicated. The first, the EO required a study to come back on the feasibility of doing an external revenue service. Quite frankly, in my opinion, I don't think there will be one. However, I think that does um, almost a disservice to what potentially may go on. So within the organization, I do think I know it's being talked about, and I think this is something to think through, and particularly from your all perspective in the private sector, I think it's very worthwhile using your collective voice to give some level of advice on whether you think this is good or not. But as many of you may know, within Customs and Border Protection, there's the Office of Field Operations that is at the ports of entry that are enforcing the trade policy for CBP, and then there's the Office of International Trade, which is helping to set some of that. trade policy. There's a lot more nuances in there. Different lawyers are housed in different places. Import specialists are housed in different places. But think of it more as one is a policy shop and one is an enforcement arm. Um, and there is definitely talk about reorganizing that. And that could be for better or for worse. I mean, I know a lot of us who were in the organization when that office was created certainly saw some of the challenges that might come from having a separate policy or strategic policy shop when it comes to putting those enforcement priorities in play. But I do think they are looking at kind of the enforcement side, less the facilitation side when they think of doing any sort of reorganization or movement of those personnel. Before I go to you, Brad, I'll just ask you if I captured that, in the right way, particularly with your vantage point as the former assistant commissioner of international trade.
No, I think you did a great job of capturing it. And I'll just remind people that if you think about what disciplines within the trade positions at CBP work for who, some of you may actually say, well, why did it ever have to be separated anyway? So if you were to say, where do the 1,000 import specialists work? You would say the answer is the Office of Field Operations. Where does the hundreds of entry specialists work? The Office of Field Operations. Where does the Centers of Excellence and Expertise report to? They fall under the Office of Field Operations. Where does the Fines, Penalties, and Forfeiture Office work for? It works for the Office of Field Operations. So almost every discipline that the trade community in the field interacts with all works for the Office of Field Operations. And so they were all part of one office pre-CBP. So to provide comfort for people, so there is a precedent where that whole trade activity, take away the Office of Regulations and Rulings and the Office of Regulatory Audit, which is probably more than half the trade office. And if you move those other individuals back into field operations, they would basically be reverting back to the way it used to be. So it's not necessarily a bad model. It might be a good model, but I think other than that, Andrew, everything you said, I agree with.
Great. That's why I asked you, and I always appreciate getting some validation in front of an audience. Brad, I'm going to turn to you. And, as Al kind of laid out, I think one of the takeaways that we all heard and we were pretty jarred with was the comment that was made by several speakers that we are not here, CBP, we are not here to debate policy or to discuss policy. And I think you kind of saw that. But then there was also some pretty good breakout sessions to give the agency some credit on different topics. And Al went down a little bit on the forced labor piece, but I know you attended some of those, not only just on forced labor, but maybe on the bonded warehouses. As we start to kind of move away from the strategic, vision of what the conference represented, what are some of the things you were hearing, and particularly in those areas in forced labor and the like, that it kind of point you in the direction of the way the agency is going, and any differences, any continuations? How do you see that going?
Yeah, certainly, Andrew. Colleagues, good morning from Houston, Texas. Glad to be with everyone. I think I'll start, and I just want to kind of underscore a couple of points Mr. Gina made that resonate with me throughout many of the different sessions. And this is with respect to de minimis. There was quite a bit of focus on statistics in the de minimis and pointing out that vast majority of narcotic seizures, not by weight, but by just volume, number of seizures, number of IPR, intellectual property right seizures, health and safety seizures, agricultural enforcement action notices, occurring in that de minimis pipeline, that 1.5 billion shipments that are coming across. So that is a starting point. And as Mr. Gina talked about, informed compliance and kind of how CBP typically engages, I had in my own mind this image of the pendulum swinging from informed compliance over to more aggressive enforcement taking place across all of the areas that I just mentioned. So one takeaway, and then Mr. Gina mentioned tariff engineering. There were comments about substantial transformation, and I think that's the legitimate way to approach. Are there ways to manufacture my product, at least semi-manufacture part of my product in certain countries for to reduce tariffs, so to speak. And as I take back there, I think there was a comment that the number of ruling requests directed to the Office of Trade increasing. So anyone that has, may be looking or thinking about seeking a ruling with respect to substantial transformation, keep that in mind. The turnaround is not that occurring very quickly. And then, Andrew, I guess to your question there, I'll start with bonded warehouses. I was very interested to attend the panel discussion on bonded warehouses. At least the panel or the breakout session I attended, it was pretty much a standing room only crowd. I think that's reflective of the interest in the topic, especially in today's environment with respect to tariffs, right? However, the panelists were very quick to say, we're not here to address policy. We're not here to get into the weeds on tariffs. A lot of redirect to frequently assess questions. But with bonded warehouses, it was very much, I would characterize it as what are bonded warehouses? How do they operate? A lot of interest. You had local, the Port of New York had a big part of that discussion. One just quick takeaway that I had from that discussion, it's taking upwards, at least in the New York example, which I think would be, we could say that applies across the country, 6 months to approve a bonded warehouse application in New York. And that's not to include all of the work that a company may need to, would have to put into place to put all of the policy procedures, physical security. So anyone that is thinking about bonded warehouse as an option for their particular operation, just keep that in mind. The time frame is going to be quite lengthy for that. There was a lot of discussion about the enforcement activity taking place in bonded warehouses along the paths that I mentioned. A lot of discussion about fentanyl pills being seized in bonded warehouses, the dye presses, the machinery used to press out the pills, precursor chemicals as well. And then I think just another takeaway, and this would be for anyone who is currently has a bonded warehouse. CBP is moving from for vetting employees who are working in the bonded warehouses from using the GOES, the Global Enrollment System, to UPACs. It's kind of an internal switch within CBP. What we were told was there will be no material impact on companies. It's more an internal vetting process. But I think there was, just talking with folks on this side, just a little bit of worry that there may be some snafus or new information that might come up with respect to an employee as a result of the new vetting, something that folks need to keep in mind. We had some time at the end on forced labor. I'll certainly can provide more commentary there, but China, I guess, and that sticks with the theme overall. the UFLPA, the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act, came up quite a bit. And if I were to get to a kind of a bottom line up front, not a lot of specifics other than what we have CT strategies have talked about in our webinars, but it was very much know your customer. If you don't know your subcontractor over in China, that's probably a red flag just to start with. Who is, are they sourcing any raw material from the Xinjiang region of China? And I did take a note, and something we always emphasize: vendor code of conduct, right? One way of exercising due diligence is for importers to work with their vendors, have a vendor code of conduct, signing off on that, where the vendor acknowledges that that they've done their due diligence, that they are not using forced labor, just broadly, any part of the world, but specifically within China. And then I guess one more, and the whole litany of high risk industries were brought up: solar panels, polysilicon, PVC, aluminum, pharmaceutical came up, was mentioned as a high risk industry. So I would just say for any folks in that particular industry, you may want to just keep in mind there might be heightened enforcement in that respect. Andrew, I'm going to pause from there. I don't know if there's anything more you'd like me to tease out, but just some quick thoughts.
So,
No,
Andrew, can I compliment?
of course you can, Al. No worries.
Okay. No, because Brad may be able to clarify on the bonded warehouses. So for the audience to know, it's very different. And I'm assuming people on the audience have many more years of experience than I do in bonded warehouses. Very different than a free trade zone. And I was asking one of my former colleagues, what should be like the concerns of pursuing one versus the other? And he said the bonded warehouse is approved locally. So if you have a relationship with somebody locally, or you need somebody who has a relationship with somebody locally, that can help possibly expedite it. The free trade zones, it's very much involved by the Department of Commerce. So that takes even much longer, a lot more paperwork, and much more difficult to do. And you have to be diligent about which one do you actually need versus the other. That was one. On the forced labor, I believe I read into it, and I may not, so I'll ask Brad again on both of these points. But the answer when challenged on that issue of informed compliance versus non-informed compliance, the CBP person made this statement. And when you first hear it, you're like, okay, that doesn't sound really positive. It says CBP struggles with telling you exactly what we need because you will go out and get it and present that back. Now, I immediately jumped to my paradigm of enforced labor. Yeah, well, you tell me what you need from me, and then I, the importing export, I provide it to you. I think what she was indicating is that somebody's just going to go out and create a fraudulent document. They're not going to want to go do the due diligence of actually going and ascertaining where every component was manufactured or whatever. They're just going to give me back exactly what I was telling them. And so in fairness to the person at CBP, I think they were saying, I can give you parameters, but at the end of the day, if what you're building has 500 components, you have to be able to determine and show where each of those components was sourced from. So, Brad, you may either agree or disagree.
Yeah, Mr. D, I mean, you characterized it, very, very well. In that supply chain tracing, it very detailed, right? It's the purchase order, it's the lot, off the manufacturing floor that went into the production of the good that's being shipped to the country that may be subject to a detention order or some further level of review. So getting down to the lot level, isotope testing, yeah, certainly. I know companies, everybody just give me, a checklist, right? This is what I have to prepare. And there are some information on the website, the Trade Remedy website, what constitutes a good package. It's as a go by. But I think you're right. I think the concern from us, and I have to admit, I was there before, that it's a cookie cutter approach versus a very thoughtful, detailed, in-depth analysis conducted by the importer with respect to the product that is being subject to that. That's what they want to see. And I think they've tried to automate at least how packages are presented to CBP through a portal system. But yeah, very much it's just another point I'll put on that. I think there was a comment made about in the past, we relied on importers to self-police. Now the pendulum has swung, and we are going to put the emphasis, the onus on the company to rebut that demand, clause there to prove that it wasn't made from forced labor.
Well, I appreciate that, guys. I think we're also learning a couple things. One is the level of energy Algina has when the Knicks are in the Eastern Conference Finals, so that is exciting to see. Also, with a good beat on the finals. Sorry to any Indiana fans out there. Anyway, we'll get to that after hours after this webinar. But I think the other thing is the changes that we're seeing in not only policy but positioning, I think creates quite an interesting environment for us as consultants to operate in. Certainly from the viewpoint from all of us as former CBP officials, it's challenging to watch, and I think it's even more challenging for us, for you guys, some of you are our clients, in terms of predictability, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of what we're all looking like, right? We're looking for some measure of predictability. We can handle the differences in administrations, the difference in policy determinations, but I think that predictability is something we're looking for, and we're even, internally to us, being honest with you all, we're also looking at it and challenging ourselves to try to figure out how to provide that to our clients in a useful fashion. I mean, Brad, I know you and I have been on several calls with our European colleagues, our Asia Pac colleagues, and our colleagues in the Americas about bringing forth some sort of predictability measure, some offering to our clients to be able to get through this time. So I think it's a pretty good segue from that to I'm going to turn it over to Sean Beddoes in a second. And Sean, I'm going to delegate some of my moderator duties to you because you've got responsibility for the next two set parts of the webinar. But and not to preload your moderating duties, but I think Arno, you come to this panel with some interesting strategies, and then we'll end with specific to CTPAT, especially in light of the question that just came through, kind of where do the CTPAT members stand in terms of, I don't want to call it believability, but, and benefit of the doubt, let's say, on inspection. But Arno and KLM, just from my 2 cents, you guys do a phenomenal job, aside from CTPAT, at looking at the requirements put on you and turning them into an opportunity to engage with CBP. And I think that in a large part was what you presented at the conference. So Sean, I'm going to turn it to you, and then I know you're going to immediately go to Arno, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to compliment Arno in public since I insult him so much in private. So we'll, Sean, I'll turn it over to you for the kind of the next phase of how to partner
Sure.
with CBP and how to leverage CTPAT membership.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So the question that just came in, well, oh, another one just came in as I looked away. The question regarding CTPAT participants and the more enforcement type agenda. We will get to that in a few moments. So I just want to let you know that I see your question and we'll get to it. And when I have a moment, I'll read the second question that came in.
The second question, Sean, just real quick, not to
Yeah.
interrupt, it's an excellent question because it talks about risk mapping and companies that do have good mapping procedures and risk assessments. You know, how are they being considered in factors? So I know you're going to get to that in the
Sure.
CTPAT point, but I think it does set up Arno nicely because this is exactly what you presented.
Yeah. Yeah,
down
exactly.
in the world.
And yeah, so and just before I get to Arno, well, two things I want to recognize. One is many of you that signed on at the beginning saw his background, which was a tropical paradise, and then he shifted it to KLM. But I want to recognize that Arnold is taking time out of his vacation in a tropical paradise to be with us today, and we really appreciate that. Secondly, Arnold participated in the supply chain security best practices and warning signs breakout session along with Fernando Gonzalez from PAM Transport. Unfortunately, Fernando was pulled away at the last minute, so I'll do my best Fernando impression in terms of reflecting on that session. But first of all, and maybe this may sound silly, but I think it's actually quite a big achievement, was the panel was 50% CBP, specifically CTPAT, and 50% industry, which I can tell you in the past, if you've been to some of these events in the past, that's not always the case. It's typically a lopsided representation of just government officials up there speaking. So I was really happy to see representation from the members of the program. And not only was it representation from the members, but they also tried to represent a lot of different modes of transport. So there was ocean, air, and road was all represented. And the experts shared their perspectives. In terms of the highway carrier piece of that, Fernando really was speaking from the perspective of life after a security incident. And they experienced a security incident in 2024, which impacted their membership. But I have to say they genuinely looked at that as an opportunity for them to reflect on what they've done right in the past, what they could have improved to avoid the incident, and the changes they've made moving forward. You know, I've dealt with that company for quite some time now, and I can tell you that they really did embrace the whole thing and the whole experience as an opportunity to make improvements. And they made some tremendous improvements in lockstep with the supply chain security specialist and the Miami field office that they're assigned to. And I think it was a great demonstration of how the program can work when everybody's communicating well. They were also asked from a industry perspective how they saw their role as a highway carrier in protecting domestic industry, which I think goes back to that America First, theme that was driving through the whole agenda. So, like, how are you as a highway carrier helping American industry? And Fernando highlighted several things about recognizing that very much highway carriers are in a position of a first line of defense because of their crossings at the northern and southern borders. How they can help prevent supply chain infiltration because it's when that cargo is moving that it's most at risk. So their security practices are just so critical. How securing their supply chain gives them a higher level of trust with business partners, and how that gives them access to contracts and business opportunities they may not have had otherwise. How they're typically less likely to be targeted for inspections at the border because of their security procedures, and just their overall ability to identify issues within the supply chain that lead to things such as, counterfeit material or unsafe products from entering the domestic market. So I thought it was a good discussion, and it was really good for there to be representation from the private sector. So with that kind of recap, and again, I promise to get to these questions probably in the next segment, which we're more specifically CTPAT focused. I'd like to turn it over to Arnold to reflect on some of those things like the supply chain mapping that Andrew raised, because that's exactly what you guys are doing. A lot of best practices, a lot of cooperation with CBP that started because of the relationship that you've established within the CTPAT program. So Arnold, over to you.
Thank you, Sean. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, from a 95 degrees place in Curaçao, so that everybody knows where I am. Yes, it was a great opportunity to share some insights on what we do and to elaborate a little bit more on that. What we specifically do is profile every single shipment that is tendered to us. And please consider us to be a transport service provider in between. So we only work with validated and vetted freight forwarders upfront and on the receiving side. So we're not transporting directly for or to a customer. There's always a forwarder involved. But as was already mentioned, with all the changes in regulation, all of a sudden, and I will quote one of the policymakers who I won't name by name, but he said, tariffs are used as a stick now. It's just giving a signal. And I think that's really what happened there. There might be a little hiccup because I'm in a place where they scare people off with Wi-Fi, so anyway, tariff as a stick. And at some point, they even started to put executive orders out to carriers, to air carriers like us, like KLM. We had fruitful discussions on that part as well, but I will come back to that later. I'm going back to the profiling part. So what we do with every single shipment that we receive is see who was the forwarder involved, who is the shipper involved, what's the actual product declared as. So we always hope to find at least HTS codes or a specific description. And if we're in doubt, we have a complete process where we have a system-generated alert that will be analyzed by a 24/7 service team that we have. If they can make up anything of it, for instance, General Electric start transporting flowers all of a sudden, they will push the button and say, stop, this needs to be investigated. If that happens, it goes to another team of what we call trained eyes, and you can imagine where we stole that term. So the trained eyes will then look into specifics like the commercial invoices that are involved, any licenses that are involved. And we do this particularly for any licensing needed goods, just to make sure that we don't end up with customs anywhere and have troubles on transporting and bringing it into a territory, because then they will start enforcing on the carrier like we are. This has led for us to, let's say, a situation where we, on a weekly basis, worldwide cancel 40 shipments. And that can be small, can be large, can be anything. Just to the extent that we say, okay, this is something that we can't cover. It is not covered by the proper licenses. We don't want to end up infringing sanctions, embargoes, or whatever, or routing, or anything else is unclear to us. So we simply won't transport it, find somebody else, or put it on a boat and try something else. When we showed this to CBP, for instance, they were, I think, Sean and Andrew were present there. They were at least surprised to the level of what we do. And actually, after a few visits in the National Targeting Center, they even explained that what we do as a commercial carrier is more than they do in the NTC. Now, I take that with a little bit of salt, but in the end, I think it showed that we were on the proper page. We are also open in sharing information that we have to share anyway, but we will do that in combination with the extra data that we gain just from the open internet sources that we use. So no covert or closed sources. It's all open internet. So anybody could have found the same information that we find on shipper routing, whatever. But the moment you combine that and make that analysis in a report and add that to a shipment, all of a sudden that shipment becomes more trustworthy for the customs officers in the United States, and that has proven to be a fact. So I think on the route mapping that we do, I think that's or the industry mapping that we do, that covers what we actually do and what it brings us in the relationship with CBP in this case.
Yeah, Sean, before it goes back to you, just to highlight some of the things that Arno was pointing to, it's really interesting when I go back to that thought of predictability and trying to get, some understanding of, how goods are going to be treated, upon arrival and upon entry. It's a good example, and KLM does a good job of this. And as he mentioned, part of the discussions with CBP kind of transcend the CTPAT or even the ACAS program, right? Because there are minimum requirements for both of those programs. Some of you are probably, or most of you are more familiar with the MSC4 CTPAT. But on the ACAS, another example of a private sector entity giving more than is required by the statute in a way that is helpful to customs, that has the effect of, number one, reducing inspections, right, which is the goal that we want to see, but also has that just intangible effect of raising the trust level. And that, I think, is a key takeaway, at least for me, on the week that we saw in New Orleans, but also kind of the future going forward. It was important to do that before. I think it's even more important now. And I think that's going to take some time for a lot of people to get used to, because I speak from my experience when I was at NTC. There was always a hesitation, and there still is a hesitation, to say, if I provide more information, that means customs will inspect me more. And I can understand that mentality. I can understand, that concern. But I think what we're starting to see is, if the relationship is right, and if the risk mapping and
Yeah.
the risk mitigation that can be done is right, then that has a real beneficial a point to the trade, to the industry. And this is outside the bounds of the regulatory framework that is in place. So the other kind of higher level lesson learned is, be creative in your collaboration, be creative in your cooperation, because if we are living in a world, as announced, where there is going to be more sticks used than carrots, then the offer for collaboration may be more limited. And so, let's find ways as the private sector to bring those creative collaborations to CBP. Because the folks in the field, and Arno, this, that we're talking to, they have a vested interest in getting their work done as securely and as efficiently as possible. So the more we can put in front of them, from big programs like we're talking about here with KLM as an air carrier, but even to smaller examples that I know we're going to touch on a little bit in the example of PAM Transport, and on some of our CTPAT best practices for highway carriers and folks that are doing their best with their loads at the border. So Arno, it's one of the more fun things I know you're working on, and and there was some good reception to that, even in this environment of as you say, I think quite rightly, sticks instead of carrots.
Well, just maybe to add one thing, and this is something that didn't strike me, but I was surprised a little bit, was the lack of actual knowledge of the supply chain. I mean, we talked to a few policymakers, which we won't mention by name, but they had some assumptions on which they, let's say, wrote their documents. They were even put out as executive orders. But when you explain to them what the actual thing behind it is, they were kind of struck. I mean, it surprised them quite massively. And after the discussion we had together with them, I was tackled 3 times at night again just by walking around, say, I still have a question, and they kept on coming back. And the opportunity to explain what the actual supply chain exists of and how it actually works. And let me give you an example. So the executive order on international mail from China and Hong Kong, where they expect a remit from the air carrier on the individual packages of 30% of all the individual packages in a mail bag, or $200 flat fee per package in a mail bag. Well, if you try explaining to them that we don't have access to a mail bag due to all international regulations, that was part one. The second part was that they explained that although the measure was put out, they never had a reaction from China itself, and they didn't mention anything. And the actual volume in total didn't decrease at all. And when I explained that a lot of extraterritorial postal operators operating from China already have to export mail as cargo from China, then the light bulb went on. And I said, okay, so it could be that it is now just exported as cargo outside of China and being, let's say, revamped into mail again in Singapore or Kuala Lumpur or something, which then the origin of the mail is Kuala Lumpur or Singapore and not China or Hong Kong anymore. So, I mean, it is put on paper. It's an executive order. It makes us embargo all international mail from China or Hong Kong to the US because we simply have no access and we can't pay that. But again, they found a way out already. I mean, the way out was there already for years in the regulation of the Chinese themselves for all the other parties there. And they never paid attention. So I think it were good discussions and they brought a light at least.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think as you're talking, we got a good question in. Dory, don't worry about the typos. We follow that on a very specific issue regarding the ISF filing 10+2 rule. And just in general, I'll respond to this. And if the panelists have any other thoughts, we can kind of talk about it as we go through the rest of the webinar. But I think this is a really good example of necessary engagement to exactly to your point, Arno, about trying to educate CBP on the realities of the supply chain,
Yep.
right? When the rules come out, we can understand the intention behind them, and maybe members of the supply chain, if looked at as good partners, can show them, hey, your intent is to get this information. Let me tell you who doesn't have it, who does have it, and to the point that I think Dory is raising, when it comes in and how it should be interpreted. And I think on the back end, it does set up for nice mitigation of penalties or potentially even elimination of penalties when you ultimately have them, because you are a good partner and you're and genuinely looked at as trying to do that. So Sean, maybe we've got some time, and I think the crowd is doing a very good job of throwing their questions in as we're going. So that whole Q&A at the end, I think we can blow right through that.
Sure.
So don't worry about the timing. And thank you to everyone who is throwing their questions in. But maybe we can, if you want to highlight a little bit of Fernando's story, that's okay. But also, I know we got a lot that we want to touch on specifically with regards to CTPAT that,
Right.
especially for this audience, might be well worth jumping into.
Yeah. I'm going to transition into more of the CTPAT specific focus now, and I think I'll start by addressing those two questions that came in a little while ago. So the first question was, where do the CTPAT participants stand in the area of more enforcement type agenda? Is there any advantage? So this is my opinion based on my experience in the CTPAT program. Of course, I invite Brad and Marcelo to chime in as necessary. But so I think it's a two-edged sword in this case. So I think as we are shifting towards what appears to be, a much more security focused position by the administration, that there's definitely advantages to CTPAT members who have already established their policies and procedures and security infrastructure. They've gone through the process of validation multiple times. They're familiar with the program. And more importantly, from CBP's perspective, more than ever, those 10,000, 11,000 members are, considered trusted partners and are certainly going to experience, if not more benefits, certainly they should not be experiencing more restrictions like non-members may start seeing at the border. So I think it's two-edged. There's going to be more focus, but I also think the CTPAT members are prepared for that focus. In terms of the cargo mapping and the risk assessments and all that, that for the most part remains unchanged from a CTPAT perspective. It's always been a focus. It's always been a critical or critical sections of the minimum security criteria. But what I do think you will see is if you have robust processes in place and you can demonstrate that through your annual security profile submission, that that you should see success in those submissions. Because what we are seeing is, or starting to see, is a shift. We're seeing more security profiles getting rejected in certain sections that weren't rejected in previous years. Not to say that they're being rejected to the point that the company's in jeopardy of their membership, but we are seeing companies that had been quite comfortable with going through the same process every year, updating the security profile, doing a few things, and then in the last few months they click that submit button, and now they're starting to see rejected in certain areas. So I would just raise that for the members that are on this call to be aware that you may want to scrutinize yourself a bit more than you have in years past, and take a real hard look at your security profile and the supporting documentation, and make sure that you are submitting the absolute best responses and evidence that you possibly can. So I'll pause there before my other comments to see on those two issues if Marcelo, did you have any comments in regard to that?
Hi, Sean. Thank you. Yeah, actually, yes. I was just last week in different places running validations and updating security profile with our customers, and CBP was telling me on the off the record on the validation, the opportunity where we had to talk with them. They were telling me that some companies believe that when they're CTPAT and they're CTPAT certified or certified validate, they think the responsibility is done. They think, okay, every single year, just click the button, check the boxes and submit it. And that's totally wrong. There's a couple of things that all companies must have to do every single year. That's the risk assessment complete with the 5 steps, including the map flow. Every single year, the map flow of the companies change. They change carrier, they change provider, they change roads, so it cannot be the same, okay? So training is really important to add evidence like list, photos, material, and upper management, man. Upper management is killing the companies because the companies do not submit evidence that show that upper management is actually involved. How you do that? With evidence of your meetings, photographs. Like right now, if we are the team, the upper management for a company, we just screenshot, have evidence and put notes on what you talk about that meeting in particular, okay? Now that's only for updating and review security profile. If you want to talk about validations, that's a totally complete history, because then you have to have manuals, evidence, proof that you're actually working on the company. And they've been start putting more attention when it's the validation, and they have a big meeting room at the companies, and there's only one contact, and I am the contact from CityPath. And then why the rest of the chairs are empty? Where is the rest of the people? That's a program that is gonna support, that's what I call supply chain, because the program supports in different departments. So they expect to see someone from HR, IT, commerce, traffic, I don't know, a little thing of everything. So in case when it's the time to talk about that particular topic, so each one of them can talk about their own area, So you don't have like a one Superman in the company that control and know everything, So that's little issues that companies sometimes, or no issue, that's some errors. It's a human error that companies sometimes happen on the date. And so I suggest that get involved as a team, That's what I can say about that, Sean.
Yeah, thank you. Before I go on, Brett, and don't feel obligated, I don't know but if you had a comment, then feel free, but.
Thanks, Sean. I think what I would add on to Marcelo's comments, and this is a bit of a nuance point, colleagues, but I think worthwhile getting out. And one of the government participants in the panel specifically mentioned, don't expect your supply chain specialist to get you into compliance. And I had to step back and think about that for a moment. Is that indicating a shift, so to speak? And I want to be careful here. I think there will always be a sense of partnership, collaboration, and coaching between the supply chain specialist and the company. But on the other hand, I think what I was taking away from that is, if the profile is broken, if it's not thorough, if it doesn't have the evidence that Mr. Castano, spoke about, don't expect a session up front to try to educate. It'd probably be rejected, your profile, right? And then the onus flip back over to the member. You better fix it. And if it doesn't, then that could lead to the further consequences. A bit of a nuance, but I thought something that caught my attention that was during the session.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for that. So let me just recap briefly here. So many of you on the call may remember the CTPAT program used to have its own exclusive conference for many years. And that, I forget when it was, maybe 3 years ago, they merged the CTPAT conference with the trade symposium. And you could argue that there's benefits to that. I think the biggest benefit for CBP was that it reduced the overall resource drain, not just financially, but just allocating people and officials to attend these events. So it went from 2 of those down to 1. But with that, you've combined now, trade issues and security issues. You've put them in the same room with a group of people that not everybody has interest in both of those topics in the same way. So in terms of the agenda at the event, there was really 3 kind of main CTPAT focused breakout sessions. There was the CTPAT basics, which I'll be totally honest with you, on the margins of the conference, I thought to myself, is there anybody here that needs that? Like, we're 20 plus years in on the program. But I suppose, from the perspective of turnover in companies, brain drain, when CTPAT experts or those responsible in a company leave and maybe don't effectively transition all that information to the new people. So there was probably some value to that. There was the session, which I feel was a bit of a bait and switch, is probably the best way to put it, which was titled CTPAT Cost Benefit Analysis to Calculate Return on Investment. Now, just from the title, all of us that walked in there from our team, and from what I gathered being present, everybody thought they were walking in to get the magic formula. Okay, what does it mean? I'm CTPAT. For every dollar I spend on security, that equals what to me? What's my return on investment? And unfortunately, it was crystal clear from the first few minutes of that discussion that there was no ROI actually in place yet. It was more about providing an update that they're working towards these things. So there was a bit of frustration there. I think people were just kind of expecting more. That said, I think there's some value in highlighting the challenges around identifying ROIs for CTPAT members. Brad directed CTPAT for 5 years. I directed the CTPAT program for almost a year after Brad left, and I can speak for pretty much anybody that sat in that chair over the past 20 years. that the issue of ROIs has always been an issue and a challenge for the program to figure out. In fact, back in 2021, CT Strategies, in cooperation with the University of Houston, we released a CT-PAT study, which highlighted, among other things, the lack of ROIs. Again, that was no secret; everybody's aware of that. But one of the takeaways from that study was that, and Al probably knows the exact number. I think members said that, or 85% of the members surveyed said that they have never considered leaving the program. To me, that's one way of measuring the ROI. The ROI is that most people find value in it, right? And I know that's probably not the answer that everybody's looking for, or what they need to get more budget allocations for security and whatnot. They did say they're working with some partner organizations and that something was coming soon. I don't know what soon is going to mean. I guess we'll all just wait on that together. There's also a part of me that wonders if, at this point, 20 years down the road, do we really need an ROI? We're over 20 years down the road. There's been over 10,000 members in the program for well over a decade. I suspect that the majority of those members, they find the program to be beneficial for different reasons, for access to fast lanes, access to aqua lane, brand equity, reduced inspections, transparency, and many more. These are topics that we've heard over and over again. But I just highlight that because I don't know when we'll get an ROI, if we'll get an ROI, and when we finally get that ROI, is it going to satisfy all of the different entities within the CT-PAT program? Because some entities, quite frankly, they don't really see tangible benefits, and they know that going in. So it'll be interesting to see. Let's shift gears here a little bit in terms of
Hey, real
CT-PAT.
quick, Sean.
Yeah, please.
If I can interject, just noting Arno's phenomenal use of the raise your
Oh,
hand
look at that. I
function.
didn't even see that.
And, I figured, and so I wanted it to not go unnoticed. And I
Thank
think
you.
Al also has inconspicuously gone off mute, so I think he also has a comment. But since Arno raised his hand, we're going to go with him first, and then over to you, Al.
I don't know how to raise my hand.
I know. Arno, over to you.
I can tell you that, Al. So I might leave you with a consideration about what Brad just mentioned, being mentioned about the member of CBP. The thing is, you can take this as a burden and say, okay, we have to adhere to all these rules. But us, the Dutch, being entrepreneurs and explorers for some years, we always try to see what's in it for us. Where's the benefit? What can we use it for? Because we have to do this worldwide. This is not only CT-PAT. We have to adhere to the programs in Singapore. We have an ACC3 program under EU regulations, which is extremely strict. So, the moment you have this in place, and that's where we let's say, envisioned what became just after waking up in some dream, is that it is a competitive advantage to be compliant. And with that, when you are compliant and that you have at least some kind of trust that the government agencies give you, that your shipments will not at least just be stopped because, and that if you do everything right, the paperwork is right, data is right, the shipment will arrive as promised. And I think that's most important for companies like us. So we try to put it as a client.
I think the beach got the better of that transmission at the end. I think we got most of what we were putting out there, Arno. Al, over to you for
No,
you.
real quick. So, Sean, you're correct. University of Houston did a statistically valid sampling. And I remember we had to raise this on defense of our former colleagues. And it was like 90%, 90% or if 93 that companies that was sampled said they would not leave the program. The only thing I'll throw out there for thought is the significant ROI that you will get from this program that you hope you will never have to use is a mitigation process. So before CTPAT, there was a program called Industry Partnership Programs. And to just really simplify it, we just always used to say, are you an active member of either Carrier Initiative, Super Carrier Initiative program, these various other programs? So I would just challenge each of the individuals that are part of CTPAT. Are you a member just in signature, or are you an active member so that if an incident was to happen, you can easily articulate what you were actively doing, which will go a very long way in having that penalty mitigated. So again, I think it's an ROI that most people don't think about, hopefully never have to use, but that can equate to a savings in the tens, if not higher, millions of dollars.
I appreciate that, Al. And Sean, before we go back to you, I just want to
Yeah.
address a couple of the questions that are coming through. Yes, there will be a recording of this sent out to all participants, so don't worry. All the nuggets of wisdom that Sean has will be recorded for posterity. And the other thing, Dory, I appreciate your questions. Definitely struck a nerve there, and I get the frustration. Just to answer it in a couple ways. One, you know, I get to be a little bit more free since leaving CBP. So if the question is, should CBP modernize some of their requirements specifically on ISF, I would say absolutely. I would say the challenge with that, from seeing a benefit on your behalf, is that would be years in the making, right? Because a change to the reg is going to require the full process to be gone through, at least in some measure. And then I think in terms of the challenges within the program, I think your points highlight a really, really important thing to say. And Sean, I know in talking with you, you agree with this. We spend a lot of time on this webinar and other webinars trying to help the industry understand kind of like how they can do best practices in order to comport with what CTPAT and CBP are looking for. But that is not to take the government off the hook for they should be doing what they need to be doing. And I think a lot of the things that were highlighted in the points made in the Q&A are really important and really valid. And I think there needs to be a little bit more accountability for when maybe an SCSS doesn't necessarily take what's being told to them in the appropriate way. It doesn't utilize, what's available to them in the portal. I think those can be challenges as well. Sean, I know you, Brad, Marcelo, you guys have all had your challenges with companies that you work with in making sure that communication is in the best way possible. At the end of the day, it's, fortunately or unfortunately, it's a human business, and sometimes you get some people that maybe don't read their responsibility the same way as others. But I think in general, that needs to be highlighted to the program. So for the promise we can make on this webinar, because we can't speak for CBP, is certainly taking not only the examples you give, but the spirit of what you put in there in our conversations with CBP, because I think they're pretty valid. So I didn't want to take up too much time. I know we've got about 15 minutes left, but Sean, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I just want to cover a few more things, and then I'll go back to Marcelo, and then maybe we have a few minutes left to address any additional questions, or just kind of wrap it up and maybe go around the table here. But so just from my perspective, I think CTPAT finds itself in a challenging time under the new administration, and I think that's somewhat true under any change of administration, right? But there's things here that have become less predictable. So in the past, a lot of times I get this question, especially recently, do you expect the MSC to change? Will it get updated? Are they going to add requirements? My answer in the past was, it took I think 18 years for that to happen the first time around, right? They updated the MSC back in 2020, and that process was very much in cooperation with the private sector through the Commercial Operations Advisory Committee, COAC. And so it was a much more kind of slow roll, predictable process. Could tomorrow they make a change and say, here's 3 new requirements for CTPAT? In the past, no, that wouldn't have happened. Currently, that could happen, right? So it's a challenging time. Also, I think there's budget challenges which are driving travel efficiency decisions. So when you're working with your supply chain security specialist on identifying locations for your revalidation or your initial validation, some of those final decisions of where that's going to take place may not really make sense to you as the end user. But like I said, these are being driven by a lot of different variables, including just resource restrictions in terms of travel budget allowances and whatnot. The program's adjusting to the opening of the new field office for the first time in a long time. I can't even remember the last time Houston, I guess. That was many years ago. So now there's a new field office open in Laredo, which actually is going to be fantastic for the program and for the members who operate in that region. And going back to our CTPAT study with the University of Houston, I believe, Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, that was the only port that we're aware of and that we spoke to that has a dedicated, as collateral duties, CTPAT POC. That's not part of the CTPAT program. That's a representative of OFO at the port that handles CTPAT coordination. So there's a lot of good work and good opportunities in that area, but it also means that members are going to see their accounts get shifted from the current office that's in charge of them to Laredo, which means they're going to get a new supply chain security specialist, which then, now you have somebody else's new style. It could be an improvement from what you had in the past. It could be not as good. So prepare yourselves for that. You're going to see that happening over the course of probably the next 18 months. A lot of these accounts are being transferred down there. And also the reality of the program is preparing. Maybe preparing might be the wrong word. The program is approaching a large percentage of the staff becoming eligible to retire in the next several years. So there's going to be a brain drain. And even if they're actively replacing those positions, you're not going to have the level of experience coming in that's leaving. So that is absolutely something that I would be concerned about. And going back to the point that we made earlier and responding to one of the questions that came in, we're definitely starting to see a shift in overall scrutiny when it comes to those security profiles, as well as the validations. We're seeing some of those become a bit more difficult. So the bit of advice that I would give to address those issues is if you are approaching a revalidation, I highly recommend that you gather your CTPAT team, whatever that looks like, your CTPAT committee, essentially your representatives of all the key departments that have equities in the CTPAT minimum security criteria, and you go through a mock validation and you quiz each other on the minimum security criteria that's relevant for those POCs. Because you want to be as prepared as possible when it comes time for the validation. I'll stop there. I'll hand it over to Marcelo. I'm sure he's got a lot more excellent information to share with you.
Thank you, Sean. Well, regarding to the new office in Laredo, Texas, yes, be prepared, everyone, because companies have been moving from one field office to another one. So I can tell you now that the Laredo, Texas field office is gonna take all the Valley in US. It's gonna take also Monterrey, okay, and Saltillo. And then Houston is gonna jump all the way to Bajío, Querétaro, Mexico, that part, okay, San Luis Potosí. Miami is gonna take importers now. Miami used to take a lot of companies in Mexico too. Miami is going to start working with importers as well as Buffalo. How do I know this information? Because I was talking with the directors of different field office, and they're telling that it's been crazy. So do not believe that you have all the best relationship with your specialist, because you're probably going to have a new one. Okay, so be prepared for that. And probably as well, people are asking if Nuevo Laredo is going to be open. Well, the answer is no. So far, all the border from the Mexican side, I'm talking about the Mexican side, Piedras Negras, Eagle Pass, from Piedras Negras all the way to Nuevo Laredo, Reynosa, Bronzeville, all that area is still closed, but Del Paso and Juarez is open. Just to let you know that you guys partners or business partners in that particular areas, it's important that if they are not CTPAT, but they're your partners, that doesn't mean if they're not, you cannot work with them. That means you need to verify they're compliant with the minimum security criteria. Okay, and just remember that the program is made by people. Okay, so human resources is one of the most important critical department that you need to put more attention, because security issues happen by people, not by accidents. Okay, I don't know, Sean, something else you want to add?
Sean, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I'm just thinking on the fly here. I just want to, and I kind of mentioned this, but I want to highlight it again. So what we see all the time is, even without the Laredo office, these accounts, CTPAT accounts, get transferred from time to time. And I would say the majority of them don't, right? So you may have been in the program, say, for the last 12 years, and you've had the same supply chain security specialist for the last 12 years. Every time you submit your security profile, you make one or two little edits, you hit submit, it gets approved right away. The validations have been relatively easy, let's say. And then, so you have this sense of security, this sense of confidence that you're in good shape. Then you get transferred to a different office, a different supply chain security specialist. You hit that submit button again on your security profile, it gets rejected. So I would advise you, and this is what we do with our clients, is we try to build up the security profile to the highest possible level so that it will withstand the scrutiny of the pickiest of supply chain security specialists, if you will. And if you work to do that, then you really are creating some insurance against that kind of surprise that you weren't expecting. So don't get overly comfortable and confident with your account today, because you could see a pretty significant change if it gets transferred tomorrow. So I just want to point that out.
Hey, Sean, just as we look to close out, and we've got 5 open questions, I think I can roll through 4 of them doing my level best, but one that just came in, it was specifically on what you guys are talking about in terms of changes in the field offices. And the question was, thoughts when you get that change and you're a company that hold both an importer status and a foreign manufacturer. So is there anything particular about that you would want to raise or give advice at this point? Or is that something that, just like any other change, you got to roll with it as best you can and, see what you get in terms of new SCSS?
So I'm going to speculate a little bit here. So anytime you have more than one account in CTPAT, depending on the nuances of those accounts, they can be and often are assigned to different field offices and different supply chain security specialists. You can communicate with the program and request for multiple accounts to go under one supply chain security specialist and one office. I highly recommend doing that, just because it makes the process easier, because you're only dealing with one point of contact. So that's one thing. I'm not sure if those two entity types would see some sort of different impact than anybody else, but that would be one of the things that could happen, right? You could right now have you could have both those accounts under one office and one specialist, but one of them gets transferred to Laredo because of the location of that facility and the area of responsibility. So that's something that you may want to consider if that were to happen, to reach out to the program, to your supply chain security specialist or specialists and say, hey, can we put these back under one account? How do we do that? It's easier for us to manage, et cetera, et cetera. Plus, it gives you more consistency and predictability because you're only dealing with one personality, so to speak.
Right. All right. Well, thank you to everyone. You guys can laugh at me if I get these wrong, but I'm gonna go rapid fire and try to answer these in the next 4 minutes and then do a 1 minute closeout. What was self-described as an off-the-wall question, I think this is not an off-the-wall question at all. Where's blockchain and why don't we hear about it anymore? Phenomenal question. I was just having that discussion with somebody the other day. This is a prime example of when government gets out ahead of the supply chain and starts talking about things because they're in vogue of the day. And, it doesn't get driven by the supply chain. It doesn't get driven by industry. Not to say that blockchain is a bad idea or that it's the idea. But the industry, as you guys know, was just, not ready for it. So even the pilot programs, just fell by the wayside. So I think it's been replaced by AI and machine learning as a buzzword that gets talked about. I do think that the machine learning and the AI is a little bit more here to stay because it's a broader topic, but I think that's where the focus is going to be. Who knows? At some point, blockchain may come back, or at least some level of distributed ledger technology will be back in vogue. I do agree that it is a shame that CBP cannot, use the stats that would be, a meaningful thing because I think that, I do think, in fairness to the program, there are a lot of intangible benefits that they don't spend a lot of time talking about. And that's a failure of the communication of the program. I also think, there needs to be a perspective more than just, I think, as was stated in the question, staying in a bad marriage. I think it needs to be also articulated that the the people that are managing the CTPAT program have bosses as well, right? And they have to justify an ROI. And so even though those people that are working on supply chain security or customs compliance can certainly see the intangible benefits, there needs to be a way to communicate that up the chain. And I think that's 100% right, that there can be better ways to do it. The new ROI endeavor might provide that. Let's see what they ultimately come up with. I think it has been talked about, to the question about an additional benefit for CTPAT members related to tariffs or duties. That's been talked about for a while. Never is it more acute as right now. I would just speculate that given the enforcement posture and the desire for those tariffs to have the right effect, I don't know that will be implemented, but it certainly should be raised by the trade. And I think it's a valuable discussion point. There's another question about whether warehouses in Laredo will be certified. As everybody on this call knows, and the audience knows, there has always been a standing kind of position of customs that there has to be some cross-border or some touch point for customs to be able to reach to that entity. That said, again, I think the theme of any change that we see is your voice and the collaboration, the communication is incredibly important, because I personally, and this may be a different opinion than people on this panel, I believe that all members of the supply chain should have some ability to enter into some recognized participatory part of, whether it's exactly the CTPAT program, I don't know, but there could be some recognition for parts of the supply chain that currently aren't eligible for CTPAT membership to be officially declared a trusted partner for CTPAT members. I think that might be a good alternative to that. That leaves me 1 more minute to say thank you to our panelists. Al, I was planning on giving you the last word, but that's dangerous at this point because we have a minute to go. But thank you to Arno for coming in on your vacation. Marcelo, your time, you're always fantastic on this. And Brad and Sean, as always, a great job. Thank you to Hallie, who remains hidden, who puts this all together. And thanks to everybody for sticking around with us. As always, if there are any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to talk about this stuff for as long as the day is long, and it'd be our pleasure to help anybody who really has some deep questions about how to manage their relationship with CBP. So, thanks to all. Have a great rest of the day, and enjoy the week. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.